At exactly 6:47 a.m. on a sleepy Tuesday morning, Karen, real name, Margaret Ellen Hill, age 54, self-proclaimed HOA queen, made a $2.3 million mistake. All it took was one snap of bolt cutters and 30 seconds of unchecked entitlement. That single moment would land her in federal custody and spark a case that would become national. News.clang. That was the sound. The teeth of those bolt cutters biting down on my reinforced security chain. A sound that didn't belong in a perfectly manicured neighborhood like Birchwood Springs, where lawns were edged with laser precision, mailboxes stood at regulation height, and homeowners whispered instead of waved. That metallic snap was the exact moment Margaret stopped being an HOA president and became a federal felon. 3 weeks earlier, I had returned to the U.S. from a long and brutal deployment. My name is Detective Elijah Torres, and I serve as a field liaison for a multi-agency narcotics task force working deep infiltration operations across 3 states. When I'm not in uniform, I blend in like any other 30-something homeowner trying to keep up with life's mortgage payments. When I inherited my Uncle Frank's house in Birchwood Springs after his sudden passing, it felt like a fresh start. A calm suburban reset. The home was older, but had character, a charming porch, citrus trees in the back, and the same creaky floorboards I remembered from childhood summers. It wasn't just property. It was legacy. Unfortunately, that legacy came with an HOA, and worse, it came with Margaret. Margaret Hill had been president of the Birchwood Springs Homeowners Association for over 6 years. Picture a woman who measures grass height with a ruler, writes violation notices on Christmas morning, and greets new residents with a packet thicker than a mortgage agreement. Her white Lexus SUV was known as the enforcement vehicle by terrified neighbors. She wore blazers with shoulder pads and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her claim to fame? Issuing 143 violation citations in a single fiscal year. And her new target? My black Jeep Wrangler, let's be clear. This wasn't just any Jeep. This was a federal asset, an undercover surveillance vehicle, retrofitted with $347,000 worth of law enforcement-grade electronics, GPS triangulation, encrypted radios, 360 internal cams, remote ignition lockdown, and silent alert transmitters. I parked it in my driveway because I had nowhere else secure while I prepped for the next operation. I'd already notified my superior officer, the local liaison, and even filed the correct documentation with city enforcement. What I didn't know was that Margaret had plans. It started with a note, folded, taped to my windshield with industrial strength packing tape. Vehicle in violation of HOA Regulation 3.7.1. Commercial or utility vehicle storage prohibited in driveways. Must be removed within 48 hours or subject to towing. Birchwood Springs HOO. No greeting, no explanation. Just Margaret's signature scrawl like she was laying down judgment from a suburban throne. At first, I laughed. Surely someone as official as she claimed to be would know that federal and emergency vehicles are exempt under municipal law. But this wasn't about law. It was about power. And Margaret craved it like oxygen. I responded politely. I emailed the HOA board with my deployment documents, my badge copy, and a notice of federal status. No reply. Instead, I got another letter 2 days later, this one certified mail. It escalated the fine to $50 a day and threatened legal action for non-compliance. I called the HOA hotline. It went straight to voicemail. I visited the community center, locked. I knocked on Margaret's door. She smiled, that tight, fake smile suburban tyrants reserve for people they're secretly trying to destroy. You're welcome to park your military hardware at a storage facility, she chirped. Our community has aesthetic standards. I explained, calmly, that's not a military vehicle. It's a federal surveillance unit in use for an active operation. Touching it, moving it, Even photographing it without clearance is a federal offense. She blinked, smiled wider, then shut the door in my face. That should have been the end of it. But Margaret didn't like losing, especially not to people who didn't play by her made-up rules, and especially not to someone like me, young Latino. With tattoos peeking from under my sleeves and a badge I didn't wear around my neck like a trophy, I represented everything Margaret Hill wanted out of her gated utopia. The situation escalated. Fast. My Jeep's tire pressure sensor started triggering. I found footprints near the driveway at night. A white Lexus circled the cul-de-sac every hour. Security cameras caught flashes of a flashlight illuminating the Jeep's interior through the windows, and a clipboard making little scribbles each time. Then came the security guards. Margaret contracted a private firm, Shield Watch Neighborhood Enforcement, run by her cousin's son, to conduct hourly visual assessments of potential threats. 2 unlicensed guards parked outside my house for 3 straight nights, radioing every 15 minutes, photographing my Jeep from different angles, and logging each entry into a clipboard thicker than a police report. This wasn't just an HOA matter anymore. This was organized harassment. My sister Lucia came to visit me one Saturday afternoon and was followed from the cul-de-sac to the main road. She called me from her car, her voice shaking. Elijah. They're trailing me. What the hell is going on? I'd had enough. I activated the Jeep's encrypted data relay. Within minutes, motion sensors, infrared captures, and night vision dashcams fed real-time data to my agency's secure server. Every movement, every photo, every attempt to touch the vehicle was now being logged and time-stamped. The footage told me everything I needed to know. 1:17. M. Tuesday morning. Margaret approaches the Jeep. She's in a bathrobe. No makeup, hair tied back, holding a bolt cutter. She's not alone. 2 Shield Watch guards flank her, flashlights in hand. Margaret whispers something. Audio picks it up barely. If you won't move it, I'll make him. She bends down, aims. The bolt cutter's at the chain I wrapped around the rear axle and trailer hook. And clang. The chain splits. An alert pings the federal server. Tamper detected. Unauthorized breach. Surveillance activated. And now, here's where the dominoes fall. The moment the chain is cut, the Jeep activates internal auto protocols, photographs all individuals within a 15-foot radius, sends an alert to federal task force command, flags GPS tracker for potential theft scenario, locks doors, disables manual access, and disables ignition. Margaret tries the door handle. Lock. Tries again. Lock. She pounds on the glass and yells at the guard. Tell Dave to get the tow truck now. But Dave never arrives, because 30 minutes later, 3 blacked-out Suburbans pull into Birchwood Springs with the quiet efficiency of a federal operation. Inside are agents from Narcotics, Homeland Security, and one very angry special agent in charge, Naomi Lang. She knocks on Margaret's door. It's 7:32. Margaret answers in a different bathrobe, this time with her hair curled and her apo and a hair around her neck like a medal. Yes? She says, feigning innocence. Lang flashes her ID. Margaret Ellen Hill? Yes. You're under federal investigation for tampering with a government surveillance unit, interfering with an active law enforcement operation, and unlawful surveillance of protected federal equipment. Margaret blinks, laughs. I'm sorry. What? Agent Lang doesn't laugh. This isn't an HOA matter anymore, ma'am. Margaret Hill stood frozen on her porch, her HOA badge now swinging like a noose around her neck. The street behind her buzzed with federal activity. Unmarked SUVs, tactical gear, and agents in plainclothes were already inspecting the Jeep, documenting the cut chain, logging every timestamp from the onboard surveillance systems. The smug superiority Margaret wore every day, the armor of her position, cracked in real time. I didn't know. She stammered. No one told me it was government property. Agent Lang didn't blink. You didn't ask. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. You issued written warnings to the owner of a federal asset. You hired unlicensed security to document it. And then you personally damaged a government-enforced lock to initiate an unauthorized removal. Margaret turned pale. I was just following HOA protocols. Our community standards. Agent Lang's tone cut through the air like steel. Your standards do not override federal law. Behind her, the two security guards, both in cheap palas with faded shield watch logos, were being separated, questioned, and shown badge after badge. Meanwhile, inside my house, I sat with Lucia, sipping bitter coffee and watching the scene. From the window, her eyes welled with something between relief and rage. She tried to frame you, Eli. She was making it look like you were threatening the neighborhood. I nodded. She didn't just come after me. She came after our family. And the job. I was tired, not physically but morally. Tired of people like Margaret, who wore power like perfume. Tired of seeing good people bullied into silence because they didn't understand the system well enough to fight back. What Margaret didn't know was that my task force wasn't just equipped with tech and muscle. We had lawyers. We had whistleblower rights. We had a full federal statute behind us. At 8:15 a.m., Agent Lang entered my living room. She shook my hand firmly. Detective Torres, thank you for securing the footage. Glad to be of service. She laid a file on the table, thick with photos, transcripts, timestamps. We've built an initial case. She's crossed 3 major statutes: obstruction, surveillance of protected equipment, and tampering with federal property. I raised an eyebrow. Will she be arrested today? Lang nodded. We're preparing charges. But the U.S. Attorney wants to go wider. We think this is bigger than a single HOA president on a power trip. Lucia looked up. Bigger how? Lang's voice dropped. We've seen similar complaints from other neighborhoods across the state. Military families. Law enforcement. First responders. Harassed, fined, forced out. Lucia's eyes widened. You think they're targeting people? Lang looked at me. We think your HOA is part of a coordinated scheme, one that profits from pushing out certain types of residents to make way for private development deals. I leaned back, breath catching. Margaret Hill wasn't just a Karen. She was part of something much darker. That same afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed like a kicked beehive. Whispers floated across hedges. Did you hear? The FBI's here? I told my husband that Jeep looked too clean to be normal. Margaret's gonna need more than a violation form to fix this. But others were scared. Some neighbors closed blinds, turned away, avoided eye contact. Birchwood Springs was built on appearances, not accountability. That evening, I got a knock on the door. It was Tom Hargrove, retired firefighter, Vietnam vet, and longtime resident. I heard what happened, he said, his voice gravel and grit. And I wanted to give you something. He handed me a yellowed folder, worn at the edges, labeled HOA Financial Records, 20192-021. I used to be on the board. Margaret had me removed when I questioned some of her contractor approvals. I flipped through the pages. It was all there. Payments to a landscaping firm with no license number, community improvement, charges for benches that were never installed, legal fees paid to a firm registered under Margaret's nephew's name. She's been bleeding this neighborhood for years, Tom muttered. But no one wanted to stand up to her. Until now. The next morning, Lucia went full recon mode. Armed with coffee, a portable scanner, and her teacher brain, she started building a timeline of abuse. We created a spreadsheet of every family who'd received excessive fines, threats of lien, or warning letters. The pattern was obvious. Families with military backgrounds, retired first responders, non-white homeowners, renters, and elderly widows. These were the people Margaret targeted the most. I Emailed everything to Agent Lang. Her reply came fast. This isn't just HOA abuse. This is potential RICO. We're elevating. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a law designed to take down the mafia, and now being used to investigate a power-hungry HOA president in the suburbs. It sounds unbelievable, unless you lived in Birchwood Springs, unless you'd seen how far someone like Margaret Hill would go to enforce power, unless you'd seen bolt cutters in her hand, eyes burning with self-righteousness, shouting, "I am the authority here." The final trigger came that Friday. Margaret, desperate and spiraling, held an emergency HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. No legal notice, no agenda. Just panic. She stood at the front, flanked by the two remaining board members, both of whom looked like they wanted to disappear. "I am being attacked by government overreach," she barked. "This is an assault on our community's right to enforce order." Only a handful of residents showed up. The rest watched from a distance or waited at my house because we'd called our own meeting 1 block away, with federal agents present. In our living room, Lucia presented the findings. 73 families had received fabricated fines, over $200,000 in OA expenses went to companies tied to Margaret's family. Board elections had been manipulated through forged ballots too. Veterans were threatened with foreclosure for hanging flags incorrectly. Agent Lang stood beside her, adding, "This is no longer just civil misconduct. This is federal corruption." One resident, an older woman in tears, raised her hand. "She tried to take my house last year. Said my rose garden was a fire hazard. My husband fought in Korea. And she told me his medals were unsightly." Another voice. Then another, like a dam breaking. Years of fear, guilt, and silence turned into outrage. And courage. At 10:32 a.m. The decision was unanimous. The residents voted to initiate a full board recall. Margaret's reign was officially being challenged, and this time, she couldn't hide behind bylaws. Saturday, 6:29. The sun hadn't yet touched the rooftops of Birchwood Springs when 3 black Suburbans pulled up in front of the HOA office. Federal agents emerged with quiet precision. No sirens, no shouting, just the calm, measured approach of people who knew they had the law on their side. Inside the clubhouse, Margaret Hill sat at her desk, flanked by her attorney, a local real estate lawyer more accustomed to contract disputes than federal subpoenas. Her hands trembled. Agent Lang presented the warrant. "We are seizing all electronic devices, physical records, security footage, and financial ledgers belonging to the Birchwood Springs Homeowners Association as part of an ongoing investigation into federal corruption, discrimination, and mail fraud." Margaret looked up. "This is harassment." Lang replied without blinking, "No, ma'am, this is justice." By mid-morning, word had spread like wildfire. They raided the HOA office. Margaret's lawyer walked out before it was even over. There were boxes, so many boxes. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a reckoning, and the community was in hiding. By 2 p.m., residents were gathering, not in fear, but in unity. Veterans, single mothers, retirees, teachers, nurses, everyone who'd been silenced or bullied or fined for trivial nonsense. Someone brought donuts. Someone else brought lawn chairs. It looked less like a protest and more like a block party of justice. People shared stories that had never seen daylight. Mr. Hassan, a disabled Marine, fined $200 for unauthorized driveway stains, which turned out to be water from his wheelchair ramp. The Ramirez family, cited repeatedly for unsightly gatherings, which were actually their teenage son's birthday parties. Mrs. Bloom, a widow, threatened with eviction for having a flower bed that didn't fit the HOAS brand. Each story added another brick to the case, each tear another testimony of truth. Back at my house, Agent Lang set up a temporary command post at Lucia, and I helped plug in screens, set up scanners, and keep coffee going. We were no longer just residents. We were part of a movement. You've built something powerful here, Lang said, watching neighbors volunteer to transcribe documents and timestamp video footage. This community doesn't just want Margaret gone. They want accountability, I nodded. They've been quiet too long. Now they've seen what standing up looks like. She gave a small smile. And they like it. That night, a second bombshell hit. One of the agents, Agent McCall, found a set of encrypted emails. Buried in Margaret's laptop backup, the messages revealed a secret communication thread between Margaret and Nolan Crestfield. A name I recognized instantly. He was CEO of Crestfield Urban Properties, a developer with active bids on 3 communities in the county, including Birchwood Springs. The emails were damning. Margaret had shared resident data without consent. She'd been promised a consulting position and a 6-figure payout upon completion of Phase 2, a term clearly referring to developer takeover. She even sent internal HOA documents, proving which residents were easiest to push out. My hands shook as I scrolled. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was planned gentrification, executed through harassment, masked as community standards, and funded by greed. The next day, I confronted Margaret in public. She was walking toward the Lexus she hadn't driven since the raid, carrying files she hoped no one would notice. A few neighbors stood nearby. Phones were already recording. Double quotes, Mrs. Hill, I called out. She paused. You ever plan on telling the community you were selling them out to Crestfield Properties? She froze. I held up a printed copy of her email. The more resistance we eliminate before acquisition, the smoother the transition. Gasps. Oh, whispered, oh my God. Her voice cracked. That was taken out of context. I stepped closer. How about this one? Target Properties flagged for early compliance penalties to pressure exit timeline. She dropped the folder. Papers scattered across the HOA parking lot like confetti of corruption. And the crowd? They cheered. Monday morning. The community recall vote went through. 82% of homeowners voted to dissolve the current board, effective immediately. Margaret, red-faced and defiant, tried to argue technicalities, but the ballots were legal. The signatures were verified, and federal oversight made sure nothing could be reversed, that she no longer held power, and now she would face punishment. That afternoon, a press conference was called at the edge of the Birchwood Springs Community Center. The backdrop, American flags, federal badges, and a community that had finally found its voice. Agent Lang stepped up to the mic. After a thorough investigation, the United States government is pressing formal charges against Margaret, Ellen Hill and co-conspirators in relation to violations of federal law, including obstruction of federal operations, tampering with protected surveillance assets, mail and wire fraud, civil rights discrimination, unauthorized data distribution, racketeering under RICO statutes. A hush fell. Then Lang added, we are not just protecting property. We are protecting people from corruption masquerading as community. Margaret was arrested that evening. Not with drama. No sirens. No shouting. Just 2 agents walking her quietly from her home. Her clipboard left behind, her badge tossed on the floor. She didn't look angry anymore. Just hollow. And somehow, that made it all the more real. In the days that followed, something incredible happened. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years brought each other food. Flags returned to porches. Veterans, single parents, teachers, the ones who once lived in fear of citations, now walked freely through their own streets. Lucia, once reduced to tears by HOA notices, was now being nominated as interim board president. She laughed. I'm just a teacher. But the truth? She taught an entire community how to stand up. 4 months later, U.S. District Court. Northern Division Margaret Hill stood before the judge in a stiff beige pantsuit, her mouth drawn in a tight line, hands trembling at her sides. The courtroom was silent except for the scribbling of journalists and the slow, deliberate reading of charges. 8 federal indictments: obstruction of federal operations, tampering with classified surveillance property, fraudulent use of HOA funds, civil rights violations under Title 8 wire and mail fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, unauthorized data distribution. Witness intimidation. The judge looked directly at Margaret, whose once imperious posture now sagged under the weight of national disgrace. This court finds sufficient evidence for a plea deal rejection, he said sternly. Mrs. Hill, you used a position of local authority to wage systemic harassment, suppress legal rights, and interfere with the federal task force in active narcotics surveillance. Gasps echoed in the gallery. Lucia sat next to me, hands clasped. Agent Lang nodded solemnly from the front row. The prosecution played footage, Margaret cutting the chain, yelling at the tow truck driver, attempting to access the Jeep's equipment. Then the emails with Crestfield Urban Properties appeared on the courtroom monitor. A jury of her peers watched in frozen silence as Margaret's own words dug her grave. Once Torres is gone, the house will sell under pressure. Target his sister if necessary. Even her defense attorney paled. The judge's voice was firm. You betrayed your neighbors, endangered national security, and terrorized American veterans, all to protect a personal profit scheme hidden under HOA rules. He leaned forward. This court hereby sentences Margaret Ellen Hill to 8 years in federal prison, a $300,000 fine, and permanent ban from holding any public or community office. The gavel hit the block like a THUNDERCL ape. The courtroom exhaled. Justice had finally arrived. Outside, the media frenzy was in full swing. Cameras, microphones, and veteran groups from across the country gathered to hear what had really happened. In Birchwood Springs, I was pulled into interviews by CBS, NPR, even Military Times. Lucia. She stood beside me, calm and confident. She wasn't just a schoolteacher anymore. She had become a symbol of peaceful rebellion against suburban corruption. 1 week later, Lucia was elected HOA president in a historic landslide. For the first time, the board had members from military families, first responders, and even renters. The first motion passed: the Birchwood Springs Military Family Protection Clause. No veteran, active duty service member, or law enforcement officer could be fined, harassed, or penalized for displaying official vehicles, flags, or memorabilia. The second motion: community transparency laws. All HOA finances would be published online every quarter. Every resident could vote. No secret meetings. No fake fines. The crowd erupted in applause. Lucia and I stood in Grandma's old kitchen that evening. The scent of tortillas and vanilla. Candles still lingered faintly, a ghost of comfort and memory. I held up a folder marked Rodriguez Foundation. Initiative. This is for you, I said. Placing it on the table, she opened it slowly. Inside, a proposal to build a veteran-led legal aid group, helping military families fight HOA abuse across the country. Lucia's hands shook. You want me to run it? No one else could. She hugged me tightly, tears warm against my shoulder. We did it, Eli. We really did it. 3 months later, Birchwood Springs was transformed. Flags flew proudly from porches. Veterans walked their neighborhoods. Without fear, HOA meetings became community potlucks. The neighborhood Facebook group was renamed Neighbors, Not Noise. The house next door, bought by a young Coast Guard family. The entire community showed up on move-in day with meals and welcome signs. Mrs. Patterson, now 91, walked arm in arm with 2 Navy wives each morning, proudly wearing a shirt that read, "My neighborhood beat Karen in federal court." As for me, I was awarded the Public Service Cross for protecting federal assets during off-duty hours. The agency let me choose my next posting. I chose to stay because this neighborhood needed more than justice. It needed someone who could watch the watchers. The final chapter came quietly. A package arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside a dusty clipboard. Margaret single quotes S. Taped to the back. Power isn't real unless people believe in it. You made them stop believing. I hope it was worth it. Lucia framed it. It now hangs in the HOA office, next to a plaque that reads, "This community belongs to the people, always." Epilogue. Today, the Rodriguez Foundation has helped over 2,000 military families fight HOA-based harassment. We've trained veterans to run for HOA boards, city councils, and school boards. We've passed federal legislation, the Veterans Homeowner Protection Act, requiring HOA oversight where military families reside. Lucia is now Director of Federal Advocacy. I've left law enforcement, started writing, telling stories like ours, because there are thousands of Birchwood Springs out there, and every one of them needs a voice, a witness, a fighter, like you.